Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Sean Johnson with us. Sean, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Sean, you're a man with quite a few things going on, so I think we'll have some interesting things to talk about today. But let's begin with your role at Digital Intent. So what is Digital Intent?
We're basically a product development company. We help companies build and grow new digital businesses. And so a lot of our clients are startups, but we also work with established companies that are looking to innovate internally. Mm-hmm. And basically what we give them is kind of a startup team in a box. So we help them from the very beginning of product strategy, trying to identify what a product should be, doing customer development, trying to validate whether there's something there, and then going through to the UI and the design, the development, the web and mobile development, and then increasingly doing user acquisition and growth.
Yeah, that's great. And Digital Intent is based out of Chicago, is that right?
Yep. Yeah. We've been around for about 2 years now, and there's 17 of us on the team. So
yeah, it's a good sized team.
Whirlwind 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it. To get to 17 people, you got to be doing something right, and helping somebody make some money.
Here and there, yeah.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. What is your current role at Digital Intent? What do you do there specifically?
So I'm one of the three partners, and then my direct responsibility, I lead the product team and the growth team.
Okay.
So product is really it's a lot. It's the customer development stuff, and then the UI, and then the growth user acquisition.
Yeah, and I want to talk about those a little bit, but you talked about customer development already. When people come to you, are they already familiar with that world? Do they understand, the Steve Blank, entrepreneurship, figuring out what you're doing? Or are they kind of clueless and they have an idea and a budget?
Yeah, usually it's the latter. A lot of times what will happen is they'll come to us with like a 50-page spec document, and we say, it's largely an educational sale. And we say, hey, that's, it's great that you obviously done a lot of thought work here. We try to find out to what degree they've been talking to customers and they've been validating those ideas, but we basically try to coach them to say that, all of this stuff is just a bunch of guesses. You have a guess that a particular customer has a particular need and that you're the solution to that, and that they're willing to give you money, and that there are enough of those customers out there to make this whole thing viable. And those are all guesses. And so let's try to, on a lean canvas or whatever, write that stuff down, and then let's try to figure out which are the riskiest parts and try to start going out there and validating it. And so, it's definitely an educational sale to get folks to sort of back up a little bit. And sometimes they have done the work. We do run into people that have met us at a networking event or something like that, and they're all in on the whole lean thing, and they've already. That's what we want to see. We want to see a keynote deck that says here's what I've learned so far, and I've gone out and I've talked to 150 customers, and this is what I've learned. That's awesome. We're not. It doesn't have to be like it's invented here, or we have to have heard it directly from the customer's mouth. But we do try to coach customers through that process if they're not already doing it.
Yeah. Do you find the ones that are not familiar with that whole world of things, are they brought into it kicking and screaming, or do light bulbs go off? You show them the lean canvas and they think, wow, what a great tool. What's their response to kind of, because it took us a while to kind of understand this stuff, and we've been at it for a few years now with the lean stuff. How do they feel on first kind of initiation? We do it through story. We basically tell them, we've seen that movie a bunch of times. We've made those mistakes ourselves. And there's nothing that's more frustrating than to go heads down and to spend 6 months building something and then to find out that nobody wants it. And it's frustrating for you. You spend, in their case, they're spending a lot of their money. And also they're giving up 6 months of their life. But it's also frustrating for our team. For our developers to have built something, or our designers to have worked on something that never, gets traction is tough. It's frustrating for everybody. And so they, I think, resonate with it when we kind of do it that way. And we try to come at it with a very sort of humble approach. And we say, it's not just that you don't necessarily know what it is. We don't know either. Half of our, a common thing that we'll say is, 50% of what we're going to talk about, or our guesses are going to be wrong. And our job is to try to find out which 50% as quickly as possible. So we don't try to come in like we're the the quote unquote experts. If anything, we try to come in and say, honestly, you know a lot more about your space than we do. Certainly, we know nothing, and so our job is to try to learn as quickly as possible and try to find out what's accurate and what maybe needs to be modified.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you said you lead the product teams and the growth teams, so it seems to indicate that there's some sort of maybe overlap in what's needed for those teams if one person can lead both. It's not like you're leading a design team and a development team. So do you feel like they're related in any way at all?
I mean, honestly, everything that we do really is related anymore. You think about what, even just looking at growth, like what is growth a function of? Growth is a function of the product strategy itself. So, ideally you're building something that does 2 or 3 things really, really well instead of a dozen things poorly. And you're addressing a large enough market where you have room to grow. So it's meeting, actual needs there. The UI is certainly key in terms of how easy is it for it to use, how is it easy for me once I hit your site to convert and then to kind of activate as I'm starting to interact with your service. Is it really easy? How effective are you at making it to where it's a habit that I want to come back and use on a consistent basis? How easy are you making it to share? A lot of that stuff's UI decisions. And then certainly the development. I mean, that's where this whole, the whole growth hacker thing kind of came from, is really a confluence of, marketing strategy with development. And, someone with a dev hat on that has a growth mindset, you say social, for example, and they're thinking, how do I tap into the social graph to drive referrals and all of those kinds of things? And you often will need somebody that has a development mindset to see those kinds of things. I mean, the famous Airbnb, Craigslist example, that devs were necessary for that to even be possible.
Yeah.
And even really conceive of that as an option. I don't think a traditional marketer would have thought of that. And so, yeah, all of that stuff is related, and that's kind of why we try to provide our clients with basically a small cross-functional team of, call it 4 people that work very well closely together. And so UI folks are going to customer development meetings, devs are going to customer development meetings. The growth team is working very closely with dev and with UI to kind of make decisions, they're not just looking at user acquisition at the very, very top of the funnel, which a lot of folks do, but they're looking at, throughout, how do we make improvements throughout? So yeah, it's all kind of come together.
I really like the way you talk about the setup where it's cross-functional teams. Because it's so different than an assembly line where it's like, okay, product's done, now we're handing off to the growth guys, go do your magic. You didn't have any input on the product, hope it works for you, getting users and letting them stay in the system, entertaining them and all that. But instead, it's all together. They're in at the very beginning because I think you're absolutely right. And I've seen that personally. The best teams, the teams that actually can grow, it's because of product decisions, because of development decisions, and then also growth decisions and marketing decisions, things like that. But there's no one person or one thing that can just make it grow if you made a bunch of really bad decisions with the entire project, right?
Yeah, that's the reason why we started the company was or I guess why we structure our teams the way that we do is that we've seen that movie where you hand the spec over and then you design a thing and then you build a thing and then the decisions are just made completely independently of each other. And there's a reason why a lot of consulting type projects fail. And I think that if there's a disconnect between the development team and the product stakeholders, which usually are the client, and what we're trying to do is alleviate some of that, where the product team is part of the product team and the dev team are really inseparable. And the client is certainly a part of that, and they're very much involved in that whole process, and we try to get them involved in as many ways as they're interested. But yeah, I think that in order for you to increase the likelihood that you're going to be successful on a project where you're bringing in external resources, I think it's really important that those teams work very closely together.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Do you find that when clients come in that they have misguided notions about growth, or do they just have no notions at all?
They don't. A lot of cases, they don't really think about it. When we started, we weren't doing growth from the very beginning, and
initially we were doing, we did see the need for the strategy stuff and for the UI and the dev, but growth was more recent. And it was really that I think we had this implicit assumption that because they were the business stakeholder, that they understood how to get customers. And it wasn't something that I think were even conscious that we were assuming, but it was sort of there in the background. There was this assumption that was the case, and it just turned out to not. It almost is never the case. Especially a lot of our clients they tend to be older. They either, maybe they were working in the corporate world and now they're kind of trying to get out of that world. And so, our client isn't really the 22-year-old with the idea. It's more like the 45-year-old with the idea. Or they're existing companies that they're used to managing existing brands, and their decision-making is a lot more cautious and all of those kinds of things. And so in both cases, the experimental kind of growth-driven approach is just something that they don't even really think about. And so a lot of times what would happen when we were first starting out was we would do the customer development, we would design and build the thing, we'd put it up, and then they would say, now what? And we'd be like, what do you mean now what?
Didn't you have that figured out?
Yeah. Or just, it just didn't, or AdWords, we're going to do AdWords. And it's like, there's a time and place for AdWords, but it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. So.
Exactly. You can't just tack it onto every project. Well, that kind of leads into my next question, is when you take on a new client with digital intent, do you find yourself having different growth strategies, like wildly different growth strategies for every company? Or do they all kind of end up seeming like they look more or less the same, or there's a lot of crossover just because of what you guys are comfortable with? What do some of the strategies look like in terms of how different or similar they are?
There's definitely things that we are more experienced in than others, and we're trying to, continually get better each week. But at a high level, you're tracking the same variables. You're doing, we just follow the whole McClure startup metric for Pirates.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, what we try to do is map metrics to those numbers, and we try to establish a baseline for those, for what that looks like for a particular client. And then we start looking for bottlenecks and trying to address that. But then once you get into the tactical level, everything is different. To the degree that you're targeting, from a content marketing perspective on acquisition, you're obviously targeting different sites and different audiences that way. In terms of, platforms that you're targeting, there are different people that use Tumblr than use Twitter, than use Facebook, for example. Once they're on your site, you're dealing with different objections and different hurdles that you're trying to overcome to get them to actually convert. The decision making for a free, B2C social product is very different than the decision making process for a subscription meals plan where they're spending $800 a month. So that stuff's obviously different. And then, all the way through, retention strategies are different. Again, if it's free versus paid, your litmus tests are different there. Certain types of products lend themselves more to sharing and referral than others, or at least referral through, through social kind of thing versus sort of face-to-face or, that kind of thing. So once you get into tactics, it's there's obviously different strategies, and really, and even like the difference between web and mobile. There's a lot of stuff inherent in a mobile device that you can't do on the web, and so you try to take advantage of that stuff when possible.
Yeah. So it seems like you have to have a wide breadth of knowledge about marketing, about the landscape, to be able to effectively apply it to any project. It can't be one of those things where I'm a hammer, so everything looks like a nail. I'm just going to apply this one growth trick I have to everything and hope it keeps working. You have to really know what you're doing, or you're just going to get lucky every once in a while, right?
Yeah, well, and part of the nature of what we do, we're lucky in that a lot of our clients do end up sticking with us for a long time, but a lot of what we try to do with the growth stuff is teaching them how to fish, I guess, so to speak, is kind of go about doing it. So we develop a strategy for them. We develop content calendars, we develop guest posting strategy, we develop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we try to bring them along and educate them as they go along, because we also know, especially,
especially for our startup clients, at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
really for both, at the end of the day, our goal is to be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we know that we're succeeding if we're going to be replaced. If you're raising a B round, it becomes really, and, you know, increasingly even an A round, it becomes really important to your investors that you have an internal team. And so we know when they hire us that that is going to become a necessity. And so we try to organize ourselves both from a debt perspective and then from a, you know, growth perspective as well, to facilitate that transition and make it as smooth as possible so that they aren't kind of left in a lurch. Because if too much of your intellectual capital is wrapped up in a third party, then there comes a point. There's definitely value in it. And obviously, I mean, that's why we exist.
Mm-hmm.
But we aren't naive enough to think that we are going to go on that whole journey with them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. So I mean, that kind of I guess it assumes that you think growth is something that can be passed off and it can be taught. It's not one of those things like, hey, let the gurus handle it. You can't even begin to understand it. It is something where if you set up the strategy, which they probably couldn't do on their own, and you set up some tactics that are going to work for them, but it can be handed off. Like, hey, here's your content strategy. Here's a schedule that might work. Here's what I would do if I was you. Run with this system. So you think it is possible to hand off growth and let it still be effective if the pieces are in place initially?
yeah, I mean, I think there are two reasons why people maybe think that it's hard. And one is that I would call it knowledge arbitrage.
Yeah.
It's valuable. It's valuable information to know how to do certain things. And so I think that not everybody is willing to share some of that stuff. There was a conference, I don't know where I saw it, it was on Twitter last week, but one of the guys was talking about the best growth hacks are basically zero-day exploits, and the reason why people don't hear about them is because that's their sort of competitive advantage. And so a lot of that stuff is kept close to the chest. And then I think the other reason is that people, they think that it's sort of because it's a creative exercise, that it can't be, quote, manufactured.
Mm-hmm. And
yes, it is a creative exercise, but I do think that it can be, I do think to a large degree it can be manufactured. So talking, content marketing, for example, I'm friends with a guy named Emerson Spartz here in town. He runs MuggleNet and OMG Facts. It has, lots and lots of properties and millions and millions of visitors a month. And one of the things that he often advises people on is to not, don't worry about trying to create all your content yourself. There's so much content out there already that you can, at a minimum, learn and see what's been effective in the past. So go out and look at, you're targeting the fashion space. Go out and find 20 of the top fashion blogs and look at all of their posts and see what has been shared the most frequently. Which are good, that's a good signal that that's something that would potentially resonate if you were to kind of take your own spin on it and try to kind of publish it elsewhere. All the way through to, you look at a Pinterest or a Tumblr type of property, that stuff is all just reposted anyway. So like you don't necessarily have to be creating all of your own content. I think that the trick is having a deep understanding of who your customer is and having a framework for testing in place, because at the end of the day, you're not going to know. We have this theory that this trick is going to work or that this campaign is going to be effective or whatever, but ultimately you don't really know until you try it. A good example is infinite scrolling. Pinterest, that worked really, really well for time on site, was huge. Etsy implemented infinite scrolling like 6 months ago, and they found that maybe time on site went up, but sales went down. And so, but you're not going to know really until you test and see how things resonate with your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for really diving in and telling us so much about digital intent. For a couple reasons. One, if people want to hire you, they know more about you and kind of where to find you and those kind of things. But also just to give us an idea of how you see growth, because that's what we're trying to do, is get inside your mind. You talked about the arbitrage with this kind of stuff. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do, is just level the playing field. Someone won't expose it, but someone else will. And if I find all the people that will expose what they know and their tricks and all this stuff, then it doesn't matter if someone else holds it close to the chest. It's going to be out there.
Yeah.
Now, you're also an adjunct professor at Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I start in May. But,
okay, so you start in May.
Yeah, so I have my first course is in May. So
Okay. Well, let's talk about the upcoming course a little bit. You're going to teach a course, as far as I can tell, on entrepreneurial tools for digital marketing. Is that right?
Yeah, not my name, but yeah, that's the course.
Yeah, well, yeah, you got to have a Kellogg name. It's got to sound way official and staunchy. From what I can tell online, it looks like the course is based on what they say, or what you call the customer relationship funnel. And I know you mentioned a funnel earlier. Explain what the customer relationship funnel is to you, or maybe in your own words, if that's their term.
I mean, it's the again, it's the startup metrics. So it's acquisition, activation, referral, retention, revenue, and so it's we're trying to structure that course to address, excuse me, to get students thinking about each aspect of that. A lot of times when they think marketing, they think almost exclusively of the top of the funnel, and they ignore a lot of the decisions that happen further down that can have just as big of an impact. Yeah. So. If I have, for example, a homepage conversion rate of 5% and I get that up to 10%, that's relatively speaking, that can often be much easier to do than to double my traffic at the very top of the funnel. And so, just trying to get them into that mindset to think about it more holistically, and really again understand sort of the intersection now where the UI and the product and tech all kind of fit in.
Yeah. Now I want to circle back to what you just said, because that's really great advice, and I never heard it put quite so clearly. Like when you said it, a light bulb went off in my head, and I've studied, Dave McClure's, Pirate metrics, all that. You said if you can get one of the metrics in the funnel to go up from 5% to 10%, you're effectively doubling all your conversions, right, from there on. And that's the same as getting twice as much traffic in the top of the funnel, which would be the user acquisition. Like the end game looks the exact same if you go from 5% to 10% with, let's say, retention or revenue, as getting twice as much traffic. And when you said that, it was so important when I heard it, because it is almost impossible to double traffic. I mean,
it's hard.
Yeah,
it's hard. And obviously it's more nuanced than that, because you could argue that the changes that you're making that double conversion, potentially have impact further down the funnel, but the same argument can be made for acquisition too. You maybe are targeting less desirable traffic, or traffic that's not going to convert as effectively. So I think that generally, as a general way of thinking about it, I think it's valid.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's great. Now, in this class, in the kind of description of it on their website, it says that customer discovery and validation for web and mobile channels involve strategies and tactics that are faster and less expensive than their physical counterparts. Explain that to us a little bit. What do you mean when you talk about the validation channels and the discovery channels being cheaper, being faster, and what are some examples of those?
Yeah, I don't think I wrote that part either, but yeah. But yeah, we do. I mean, so an example would be AdWords. AdWords can be a really effective way for testing a lot of different kinds of things. You can test positioning statements. You can test offers. You can test, to see kind of what gets people to click in the first place. But then you can also test what happens once they land on your page. And so it can be a really effective mechanism to for learning purposes. And really even all of our strategies. I mean, you talk about, one of the things that we tell our clients is when we put something up, your first 1,000 users it's an extension of customer development, and that's not from us. That's from Kissmetrics. I don't think nothing I say is original, but
that's right. Very few people have anything original to say. It's just collecting the best thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, so even though we call ourselves technically a growth team, a lot of what we're doing is identifying viable channels to acquire people, and so a lot of that stuff really it's testing. It's testing different strategies at a small scale to kind of see what takes, so that when they kind of go in and they're trying to raise their A round, they can say, you know what, we have good visibility into, our homepage to email conversion is 30%, and 60% of those people complete our activation funnel, and 50% of those buy, and they spend an average of X. And if we can, they at that point they know that if it, depending on what their customer acquisition costs are. They can go into investors, and the argument is basically that this money is going to be just to kind of put gas, put on the gas pedal, because we've got, at least we have good
reason to believe that these numbers would scale to the degree that they're pursuing scalable channels.
No, it makes a lot of sense, because an investor, if they can see the equation and they see where their dollars fit in that equation, and then they see the end of the equation, the dollars they get back or the company makes from it, it's just an easier investment. We had somebody on the show before that kind of mimicked what you just said, that the first few users, the first 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, whatever, it's to learn from them. You're trying to learn, and he calls that the traction stage. This is Brian Balfour. And then he says after the traction stage, you go into the growth stage. And that's where you've already learned. Now you're putting fuel in the fire, dumping the money into whatever channels you need to, because you've already learned enough to then go full speed and get to the moon,
So a good example for one of our clients is it's a mobile app that's it's targeting the high school and college market, and it's definitely designed to spread, and they hope that referral is kind of a big part of this. But there is no mechanism other than manually telling your friends about it right now to refer. And the reason was we wanted to find out, we're testing at the present time whether or not people will use the core experience in and of itself, whether or not sharing is kind of a component of that, and trying to find out how valuable it is with a small group of people. How many users, how many friends do you need to have using it in order for it to be valuable, and that kind of thing. So I mean, you can bake in a lot of the things that can facilitate referral, can facilitate retention, all those sorts of things at the outset. But yeah, it's still at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff that you're doing early on is testing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, ignoring your own upcoming lectures for a moment, how do you feel like management schools, MBAs, that kind of world, do you think it really prepares students? And this is a loaded question for somebody getting ready to be an adjunct professor, but do you feel like it really prepares people that want to be entrepreneurs, founders, CMOs, or do you think there's a better route? And what do you think? Everybody has their own opinion. I don't know if there's a right answer, but
I don't think there is a right answer. I mean, it's yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it hurts. At the end of the day, I mean, if those were, listed a variety of different titles there. To be a founder or an entrepreneur, obviously, at the end of the day, there's no replacement for experience and for doing it. And so I would argue that you would get your MBA and try to start something. I think that there's obviously the accelerators have proven that there's a lot of value to doing that. One of the historical arguments for getting your MBA has been the quality of networking that you would get out of it. And I think that those accelerators bring that to the table now, and so it's different that way. I think you definitely have. One of the things I think that will remain to be seen is to what degree of what kind of a pedigree do you get from coming out of an accelerator. For example, obviously if you come out of a Y Combinator or something like that, that might, in 5 years, that might be the equivalent of, or maybe it is now, maybe, the equivalent of saying I went to Kellogg or I went to Harvard Business School or something like that. Yeah. I do think that there is a stigma at a lot of startups that, MBA means expensive and not willing to get scrappy and to get dirty. And I think that there's some validity to that. I think that you plowed all that money into getting a degree, or you have some X in student loans that you need to pay off, and so you do have a desire to have the kind of income in the short term that can kind of start to whittle that down, which may or may not be feasible for that role kind of starting out. And I do think that there is something to be said for the hustle component to it, which is why I would say both and. If you can go in and you can say, hey, I have, I got my MBA at Harvard and I've been working on this thing, and here are my, here's how it's gone, and I can demonstrate that I've, gotten some traction and I've been able to make a lot out of a little, then I do think that that's valuable. Because, the other side of it, one of my partners, Joe Dwyer, he has his JD MBA from Kellogg. He's also an adjunct, actually, at Kellogg on how to create innovation teams for larger companies. But he runs our strategy side of the business, and we have a number of clients that came to us for a strategy kind of engagement where they were able to open up, multi-million opportunities for them that didn't previously exist, and they were able to see that kind of through their, his sort of classical, so to speak, background.
Yeah.
We have a telepharmacy client that they just did a project for that went in to a multi-billion-dollar company. He's a 26-year-old kid, and he went down. And he's talking to their C-level execs about either a partnership or potentially an acquisition, and all of the groundwork for that was laid by a couple of MBAs that they gave him kind of what he needed. And he told them, he came out of the meeting, told them like, there's no way I could have done that without your guys' help. So I do think that there's definitely validity to getting an MBA. Obviously, I mean, I hope so. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time teaching. But
yeah, that's all right.
But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question. I mean, if you're saying if there are going to be a lot of people that are going to say, hey, I'm trying to build a B2C startup, and it's all about kind of being scrappy. Yeah, you don't need an MBA to do that necessarily.
No, I think it's a great answer. I think it's a balanced and wise answer, because there is no one size shoe that fits all, and you're going to have to really find the right people for your team. Just like growth strategies, to find the right growth strategy for your product, you have to find the right people for your team, and your team might benefit immensely from an MBA, and it might actually be hurt by an MBA. Who knows? It depends on the direct scenario you're working with. Another thing,
I think it's good shorthand too for hiring. I mean, it when you get bombarded with 500 resumes, it does mean something. I think I think it at least puts them in a decision set. It's certainly worth bringing them in and then seeing what are their expectations. Are they willing to kind of get scrappy and to, I guess, not treat their pedigree with a sense of entitlement and to get dirty just like everybody else. Yeah, they've proven that they're hardworking. They're proven that they're willing to kind of do what it takes. They've made it through some pretty strenuous stuff up to this point. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot of good things that you can say about it.
Yeah, and the onus is really on the person doing the hiring. Like, they have to hire somebody that's scrappy and has an MBA. You can't just use it as a shorthand and that's it. No, it means their quality. You have to then do your due diligence and make sure they're quality. Another thing too is I think people are surprised when they see the real statistics on how many people that found startups actually do have bachelor's degrees at least, and sometimes masters and beyond. I think PhD drops down quite a bit, because to have the PhD mindset, you probably don't have the entrepreneurial mindset. But bachelor's and masters, the correlation is much stronger than we would think by looking at Zuckerberg and Gates and these kind of people. They're the the outliers and almost the exceptions, because a lot of people really do end up going through higher ed and learning a lot, building their network, and then going and doing things.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are also older too. I mean, that's another, kind of to your point, they're not the 22-year-old startup. There's definitely a place for that. I think part of why accelerators attract that demographic is because the tolerance for risk is a lot higher. They don't have kids, they don't have a house, they don't have any of that stuff. Their income requirements are a lot lower, so you can make an investment for considerably less. From an investor's perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. But I think it's really important. I think it almost becomes critical at that point that you surround them with quality mentors and all of those kinds of things to guide them, because otherwise it can be a really good way to waste money. I mean, I think it was, I mean, just that, you look at the success rate of angels and of even the VC world, and, that some of those numbers are coming to light. It's not like they're amazingly successful at picking winners here. So there's a lot to be said for, like you were saying, having your network, being able to make a phone call and have a channel partnership with, with some massive company. I mean, there are definitely advantages there.
Absolutely. Let me ask you also about a meetup that you lead. You lead the Chicago Growth Hackers Meetup. So how did this meetup begin?
Honestly, it was, like I said, we try to be really humble about this stuff, and we wanted more than anything to learn. And I have 2 kids, and I thought I could either fly around the country and try to visit people, or I could try to bring them here. And so, and Chicago is kind of interesting. We have a pretty vibrant tech scene, but the network, there's basically a networking event going on every single night of the week. And it's usually like the same 200 or 300 people listening to one of the same 20 speakers. And so I wanted something a little bit different than that. And I wanted something that was a little bit more tactical in nature, where folks could kind of come and walk away and immediately kind of go into their office the next day and implement some of the stuff that was talked about the night before. So those were sort of my goals. And, there wasn't a, we kind of leveraged the growth hacker term, which took off, and, some people hate it now and whatever. But I think that the time was right for it, because people are realizing that it's not ultimately whether or not you can get the product built. It's ultimately whether or not you can get traction. So put up the meetup page. Really, it was, we had a 20-minute conversation about it. And I put up the meetup page, and I just started emailing people and saying, hey, would you be interested in coming out? And Noah Kagan replied right away and said, sure. And we had our first meetup. And so we've done 3 of them, and our 4th is coming up here in a couple of weeks. It's been fun.
Yeah, that's great. What does a typical meetup look like? Because I'm asking so that people can imitate it if they choose to.
Yeah, so so I only organize it when I can get a speaker. They're almost never from Chicago. So I try to fly them in. And so I don't have like we're going to have one every single month. We basically have one when we have one. And we cap it. So you have to be, we're not that picky about who we let in, but we just say, you should either be a founder or you should be someone that's actively involved in trying to drive user growth. And so that kind of eliminates a lot of the professional networkers or lawyers or whatever. It's not that they wouldn't add value necessarily, but there's just, again, there's dozens or hundreds of meetups in Chicago where you can mingle and all that kind of thing. And so we wanted to try to keep it focused and keep the quality of conversation high. And then we cap the meetings at around 60 people, so that, again, for quality of conversation, so that people can kind of interact, and there's a high level of interaction between the speaker and the audience, that kind of thing.
Would you recommend that other cities try to start something like this? Or do you feel like they need to have a pretty well-developed tech scene like Chicago has?
Yeah, I mean, I've been approached by a couple of people looking to get advice on how to do the same thing, and they haven't necessarily had the same success. I think that being in Chicago helps a lot. It's a destination. I try to, when someone's coming out, I try to see who that's in Chicago would be interesting for them to meet with, so that it's not just coming in for me. And so I try to introduce them to different people that they can grab coffee with or whatever. So we definitely have a concentration of people that a lot of smaller towns wouldn't necessarily have, but certainly the New Yorks, the LAs, the Austins, the Boulders, out all over the world. I mean, any of those, Boston, any of those places that have a relatively flourishing tech scene, I think would be a great fit for something like that.
Yeah, and here's kind of a fun question: what's the best meetup you guys have had so far? Maybe who was the speaker, or what made it so great?
All of
Good
them.
political answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was different. So Noah came in. Noah's was kind of unique because he came in and then he ultimately didn't even talk about the topic at all. He just sort of asked people what they wanted to talk about and then put it up on a board and started going. But his energy level was really high, and I think he wanted to communicate to people just the importance of scrappiness. And so and he started asking people, okay, so what's your idea? And guy says, I want to do a gym membership where if I'm traveling, I can go to any number of member gyms or whatever. And he just said, hey, how many of you are traveling in the next 60 days? A couple people raise their hand that work out. Where are you going? Give him your email address and your phone number. And he stops the meeting until they get up and actually share their email address and phone number. And he said, this is how you build a business. Don't worry about the technology. Go out and find these people at gyms so that when they're traveling to Denver in a month, they have a place to go. And that's going to be your business. Don't worry about building this elaborate matching system and all those kinds of things, because that's not ultimately your business. That's a bunch of code that doesn't do anything. So it was really, the energy level was really, really high there. The other talks were great though. I mean, they were I think closer to what our vision was in terms of it being tactical suggestions for driving different aspects of the funnel and that kind of thing. Jamie Quint came in from Lookcraft and showed people how he was able to get 50% homepage conversion, which is crazy. And that raised everybody's eyebrows that he was able to do that. So that was really cool. And he went into how he went about doing that.
Yeah.
And then Aaron Ginn was awesome too. I mean, he came in. He's at StumbleUpon now. He was actually the hacker for the Romney campaign, and talked a lot about how to build a team for growth and sort of the dynamics that are at play there. So.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, this has been a great interview. I have one final question for you, just to kind of give back to the people listening for just a moment. What's the best piece of advice that you can give to someone starting out that really wants to master growth? Where should they begin? What should they be doing? What's the best advice you have for somebody like that?
I would go. I would just start trying stuff. I mean, build whether it's even if you don't have a product. Let's say you just have a blog or something like that. Try to play around with a lot of the tactics and strategies. Go to a place like Kissmetrics. They have all those sort of guides for how to do Reddit, how to do whatever, and just play around with stuff, because a lot of that stuff is going to be relevant. Well, for one thing, you want to try to leverage free strategies versus paid strategies as much as possible anyway, because they're more, obviously it drives down customer acquisition cost, and that's a very good thing. So you don't necessarily need to have a lot of money to try a bunch of stuff, and you'll learn a whole bunch of things. I mean, you'll learn how to write compelling content. You'll learn how to develop guest posting strategies. You'll learn how to write posts that convert. You can put some sort of sidebar on the side of your page and collect emails and test out email marketing and do a whole bunch of different things and test out how various ways to build up a social strategy or some of that stuff. You're not gonna get as much in terms of deeper in the funnel, referral and retention and some of those different things. But I think it would be a really good start for somebody that's kind of starting from zero to just become familiar with the various sort of acquisition strategies that are out there, and how to leverage them.
No, I think that's great advice, and it's interesting when you say that, because that's kind of the trajectory my own career has followed. I started with the top of the funnel, acquisition, and I learned, those kind of tips and tricks and tactics and strategies, and then the further I go in my career, the further down the funnel I go in terms of trying to master it, but I never really thought about it. So I think that's great advice. Start with the acquisition part, and then when you have some acquisitions or you have a product that has some legs, then you're going to figure out activation, and you're going to figure out all those other kind of pieces to it. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you're a busy man. You have a lot going on, but we really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I appreciate it.